taking it slow, but it's the way you move your lips and how words roll off your tongue that's got me speechless. Wanna sit and talk to them more. I'm crazy about you and every little thing that you do. I wanna talk, sit, cuddle, make love, baby, or sit in silence. Oh, has anybody ever told you about your eyes? The way you move your lips, baby, when you cry. Tell me, baby, I wanna be with you, you wanna be with me. We should get together, baby, we should have some kids. Hey, baby, I'm in my wife, okay now. 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 I love it when you ask me how I'm doing today. You love to check in, I get lost, I get in my way. But it's the way you move your lips and how words roll off your tongue that's got me speechless. Wanna sit and talk to the moon. I'm crazy about you and every little thing that you do. I wanna talk, sit, cuddle, make love, baby, or sit in silence. Oh, has anybody ever told you about your eyes? The way you move your lips, baby, when you cry. Tell me, baby, I wanna be with you, you wanna be with me. Hey, we should get together, baby, we should have some kids. Baby, I'm in my wife, okay now. 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 I love your face, your grace, your waist, and how you dance on your toes. You got that good stuff, type of love and make me wiggle my nose. You give me fire and desire, make me conquer my foes. You have my heart from the start, now hold my hand, let's get.
These are reading glasses, but I have to read and do both. So anyway, um, I'm Don Scholes. I want to welcome you all to our Utility Leadership Conference. Don't know how many this is, but it's more than 8 or 9. The Leadership Conference really came about as a result of what you all are all familiar with now, this utility training that's required originally for utility district commissioners. And at some point, the legislature, in its wisdom, decided it was necessary for board members of county and, not too loud, sewer, county and municipal utilities. So anyway, the conference was really one of Bob's ideas along with mine. And for you all that are not aware, that Bob Freudenthal, who'd been the executive director of TAUD for 15 years, passed away a few weeks ago on October 5th. And this is the first event really that TAUD has had since Bob's passing. And, I first got to know Bob right when he became the executive director. Before I came to work for TAUD, this is way too loud. Before I came to work at TAUD, I was the outside counsel for TAUD for many years. And so I was around when Bob was hired. And I had the ability to sort of see how under Bob's leadership, TAUD, as an organization began to improve, became more professional, began to do a better job of what they were organized to do. lot of that is attributable to Bob and his leadership. Bob was a very bright man, and but he was also a very thoughtful man. Through the years, Bob and I got to where we thought a lot alike. He could walk in, I could sit down in front of his desk and we would look at each other and know what we were going to say about whatever the issue was or the program we were talking about or the future plans. I could talk to Bob about, legally, here's what we can do, or here may be the best way to go about doing it. But Bob had the ability to sort of say, Don, that's good, but here's the practicality of how we're going to do this. And so that was the real value, at least personally to me, that he brought. So, under Bob's leadership, TAUD, even on a federal level, Bob was very involved in the National Rural Water Association. And TAUD sort of went up in the view that states across the nation had about TAUD, primarily because of Bob's involvement and his ability to innovate. And even at the state level, what TAUD was and what they stood for got better and better. Probably one of the best things I ever heard about TAUD was within the last couple of years was really from one of our lobbies that says, Don, now if there's a bill in the legislature that deals with water or sewers, most of the legislators come to us and say, what's TAUD's position on this? That's a big step forward than existed 15 years ago. So, Bob was a friend of mine. Trying not to choke up, but Bob was a good friend of mine. So anyway, I would like today, if you would, just let's take a moment of silence, if you would, to honor and remember my friend Bob Frudenthal. Thank y'all for doing that for me. I appreciate it. Um, you know, Not every year, but most years when we have this conference, I usually do a track that Beth likes to call Utility District Commissioner 101. And generally, it's a breakout of the main group, um, where I sort of spend sometimes 3, sometimes 4 hours trying to talk a lot about the basics of utility districts. Um, Bob sort of told me, he said, you need to do that to the big group because I sort of assume that everybody knows if they're a commissioner, they know everything there is to know about utility districts. I've learned through the years that that's not necessarily true, even if you've been a commissioner for a long time. So, originally this conference was created for utility district commissioners. It has grown a little bit since then. So I know there are some county people here, there are some municipal people here, but we're going to talk primarily today about what a utility district is, how it's supposed to operate. So you all that are not utility districts, you're going to learn something about how utility districts operate, and hopefully those of you that have been on boards for a while, will learn something new. And I've got much more information on that to tell you than I can put together in 50 minutes. So we'll just start out with that. I know in a big group, sometimes people are shy to raise their hand and ask a question, but I would encourage you that if I say something that doesn't make sense, or if you want further information on it, it's fine to raise your hand. I'll try to answer your question during the session. If not, we'll do it afterwards, okay? So, utility districts, what is one? Okay. Utility districts are governmental entities that are created pursuant to state law to provide a public utility service. Okay, that's what they are. There's a chapter in the whole law of Tennessee called the Utility District Act 1937. The act itself has been around that long. Oddly enough, there's several provisions that were in that original act that are still there. So, um, enacted in 1937, lots of changes through the years. As a governmental entity, anybody that's ever heard me talk, you know, governmental entities are different from private businesses. If you're a local government, which a utility district is, you can only act the way the legislature has asked you to act. You only have the powers that the legislature has given you the power to do. So if anybody ever asks you, can we do this? When they ask me that question, the first thing I do is I go look in the Utility District Act. And if I can't find it there, if it's a different subject, I keep looking. Because if I can't find where the legislature says it's okay to do, I'm going to tell you you can't do it. Or if they've said this is the way you have to do it, I'm going to tell you that's the way you have to do it. So, but by law, a utility district is a municipality. That's in quotes because that's what the statute says. And it's a political subdivision of the state, just like a city is, just like a county is. I like to think of, when you're trying to think of what's the nature of a utility district? Just think, when it comes to its character, a utility district is just like a city, except their only thing they can do is provide the utility service that they were created to provide. But when you're thinking about what's the nature of the entity, in a lot of ways, it's just like a city. In Tennessee, there's approximately 170 utility districts, okay? Been that number for a while, and some of them have been around for a while. So when was the first utility district created? First utility district was created in 1939. That's the Madison Suburban Utility District. Aha! He's claiming victory. So, and Madison Suburban Utility District is still in business. Madison Suburban Utility District is actually located within Metro Nashville and has been operating a water service since shortly after 1939. They're a much bigger entity than they were back then. So, but most utility districts in the state were really created in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. That was really when USDA, what's now known as Rural Development, but used to be known as the Farmers Home Administration, that's when Congress began funding that program with low-cost loans and grants in order to promote water and eventually wastewater service in rural areas. So most utility districts were created, and there were some in the 50s, but most were created in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. A few in the 90s. There have been probably 3 or 4 that have been created since the year 2000. A couple of those should have never been created. They weren't big enough to really have a customer base to sustain themselves. So in most places, even in rural Tennessee, there's not a lot of places where a utility district or another rural type entity really, it's probably going to be economically feasible to be created. And as evidence of that, probably about 15 years ago, the Utility Management Review Board, which is now known as the Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation, much easier to say the acronym TUBOR, which you're going to hear some over the next couple of days, they now have to approve the creation of a utility district just because there was one too many utility districts that got created that wasn't economically feasible from the beginning. So what services can a utility district provide? Utility districts have the ability to provide pretty much all of your traditional public utility services, except one that's missing there, electric service. Utility districts have never been able to provide electric service. But, most of you all in here are water or water and sewer, some natural gas. Some natural gas utilities provide propane service. Interestingly enough, the act itself authorizes utility districts to provide a lot of other what I call non-traditional utility services. That's a list right out of the statute. Remember, this statute is an old one. It was passed in 1937. There was one utility district, Old Hickory Utility District in Nashville, that at one time provided water, sewer, garbage collection service, street lighting service. They had ball fields and a gym. And at one time, they provided fire protection service. Nobody else like that anymore, but those were all services really that a utility district has the ability to provide. There's actually a fire department in Tennessee called the Blount County Fire Protection Department. That's actually a utility district. Nobody really knows they're a utility district because they just look like any other rural county fire department, but they're not. They have the same governing structure as you all do. Every once in a while, I get a call from Chief so-and-so, I forget his name, from the Blount County Fire Protection District asking me a question about how they operate. So, not to go through a lot, but just a quick 1, 2, 3 of how utility districts are created. All utility districts were created originally by a group of property owners getting together and filing a petition with the county mayor of the county in which they wanted to create the utility district to provide service. That in and of itself is a little odd. County mayors are not used to a role like they play, especially in the creation of utility districts. But that's the way it's been set up for decades. After the petition's filed, county mayor holds a hearing. The county mayor determines that the, quote, public convenience and necessity demands the creation of the utility. Then the utility is actually created by the county mayor signing an order that creates the utility district. The order is supposed to have the name of the utility district, the services the utility district can provide, water, sewer, natural gas, a description of the utility district's boundaries, and the appointment of the original Board of Commissioners and their terms. Regardless of what you've heard, utility district commissioners have 4-year terms, okay? Not 3-year terms, not 5-year terms, 4-year terms. However, in the beginning, when a utility district was created, if they had 3 members, there was 1 member appointed for 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. After that, all 4-year terms. The idea was to have, a commissioner going off every year if you've got one of 3 or 4. So that's basically the way that you were created. Every once in a while, I will get a question. Somebody has asked me for a charter of the utility district. Got that question a couple of times in connection with the America Rescue Plan funding. Well, charter makes sense when you're talking about a city, but it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're talking about a utility district. So the charter of a utility district is really that order of creation that was signed by the county mayor or the county executive, or if you go really back, by the county judge when the utility district was created. That's just sort of an example of the South Blount County utility district, their original order of creation. So you don't have to raise your hand, but if you're a commissioner, if you have not seen your utility district's order of creation, you need to ask somebody at the district to show it to you, because it's the document that basically brought the utility district into being, and it's got some vital information in it. if you ask somebody at your utility district for a copy of the order of creation, and they say either I don't know what you're talking about or we don't have it, you should be able to get a copy of it by going on the Secretary of State's website. And if you've ever, all corporations in Tennessee have to file their charters with the Secretary of State. They sort of use that same system for utility districts. So at one point, the legislature said, okay, utility districts back in the 50s, if you've been created, they were supposed to file their order of creation with the Secretary of State. Most of them did. So you can go on that website, you type in, just like you were looking for a corporation, the name of utility district, and it'll pop up a document that has a Secretary of State number. You can't get a copy of it. Yes, sir. It will. Yes. Yes. And so you can't get a copy of it because the Secretary of State's office wants their $20 for a copy. So it'll give you a number and you can contact them and you can get it from them directly. So, but if you've not seen it, especially if you're brand new, you need to ask for a copy of the order of creation. It's the document that created you, and it's also got the document that describes what you should be, the services you're providing, and also what your boundaries are. Okay, is a utility district a part of the county government in which it is created? Everybody here is going to go, no, it's not. Now, you'd think that was a given, but probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was contacted by the Haywood County Utility District to come and help them do some things. So the first thing I did was I got on the Secretary of State's website. I got on the Comptroller's website to try to find their audit because all utility districts have audits. It wasn't there. And I couldn't figure it out. Finally, I thought, okay, I'm going to look at the Haywood County audit. Sure enough, in the Haywood County audit was information on the Haywood County Utility District. Not appropriate. Contacted the auditor for Haywood County. Haywood County Utility Districts should not be incorporated in the Haywood County audit because they're not a part of the county government. So, really, after the creation of the utility district by the county mayor, really the only connections after that with the county are the county mayor of the county, or if you're multi-county, county mayors, they continue to fill vacancies on the board. That power is vested in the county mayor. Utility districts have the ability to expand their boundaries, but to do so, you have to go back to the county mayor and follow a similar procedure as you did when you were created to expand your boundaries. If you want to provide a service other than the service you're now providing, you have got to go back to the county mayor and ask to be able to provide that service. So a lot of utility districts originally created as water districts, but at some point the demand for sewer service got so great that they decided they wanted to get into the sewer business. Couldn't do it on their own. You had to file a petition with the county mayor, go back to the county mayor, show why there's a need for your service, and if the county mayor says, yep, there's a need for the service, then the county mayor does a little order that adds sewer or adds natural gas to what you can do. That order also is supposed to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. If a utility district wants to merge with another utility district, a city, or a county, again, you've got to go back to the county mayor. You've got to file a petition with the county mayor requesting the merger or the consolidation with the other governmental entity. You and the city may be all in agreement that we want to consolidate. But ultimately, that decision's not up to the governing board of the city and the utility district. It's up to the county mayor of the county in which the utility district was created. Generally, not a problem. If the parties have reached an agreement that they want to consolidate, then generally it's sort of a perfunctory hearing. Although I was involved in one in which it got denied. And that's another story that I don't have time to tell, but I'll tell it to you if you want me to later. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. The question that you all couldn't hear, this gentleman's a commissioner of Madison Suburban Utility District. And Madison Suburban Utility District, their appointments are not made by the county mayor of Nashville. Okay. Remember that at one time, Nashville had county, city. They consolidated in 1964. So there was a time when that was the way the appointments were made. But this is a perfect illustration of why the legislature has a lot of control over what you do. Because at the time metro government came into being, all of a sudden there was no Davidson County mayor and a mayor of Nashville. Those persons became one and the same. There were 3 utility districts, and maybe even 4 at the time, that were a little uncomfortable with that new mayor of Metro Nashville Davidson County appointing commissioners. They got a representative to amend the Utility District Act to provide that if you're a utility district in Davidson County, those appointments are made by the probate judge of Davidson County. Perfect example of why most of what I'm going to tell you applies to everybody, but like the gentleman who's a commissioner at Madison Suburban Utility District, he heard something that's not what he did, and he's right, because the legislature passed a statute many years ago that affected who makes the appointments for utility districts in Davidson County. So I'd mentioned the Old Hickory Utility District before. Old Hickory Utility District was in Davidson County, and about 10 years ago, they did wind up merging into Metro Nashville. But the mayor of Metro Nashville didn't make that decision. That decision was made by the probate judge in Davidson County. Why? Because the legislature said that's the way to do it. Okay? That's the bottom line. Yes.
You explain, just touch on it a little bit about elected still.
Yeah. Yeah. The question is, there's a commissioner who is a commissioner at a utility where the commissioners are elected. They are not appointed by the county mayor, which is probably true for almost everyone in here. For many years, if a state legislator was unhappy with the utility district, typically the way that they would try to address their unhappiness is they would pass a bill that would basically affect a utility district, and it would either increase the size of the board from the normal 3 to 5. It might also change the manner of selection. And there were probably, at the max, there were probably 10 or 12 utility districts in the state who had had special legislation that required that their commissioners be elected by the customers. There's probably, we were trying to talk this morning, 6 or 7 of those that still existed. Fortunately, in 2013, the legislature passed a bill that basically said every utility district in the state will now use county mayor appointment, except those utility districts that on the date of this passage of this law are elected commissioners. So there are some utility districts, and those of you that are appointed that aren't aware of these, that they actually have an election by the customers to elect the commissioners to fill the vacancies, okay? So again, another point that illustrates that while there's a general way the utility districts are created and operate, they're creatures of the legislature. So if the legislature wants to make a change in the utility district law, and even to make a change that may affect one or more utilities in a county, they have the ability to do that. Really quickly, I'm going to run through this. I've been telling you what a utility district is. Sometimes it's helpful to know what you're not, okay? So we're going to talk about other entities in Tennessee that provide utility service. No surprise, all cities in Tennessee have the statutory power to provide water, sewer, gas, electric, utility service, as well as other things. Now some of them have, can provide broadband service. By far, more people get water and sewer service from cities in Tennessee than any other utility type, just because the big populated areas, generally the municipal utilities are providing the service, okay? There are some counties that provide water and a few that provide wastewater service. Most of those that provide water service have created a county board of public utilities that basically pretty much does everything with the operation of the utility other than issuing debt and owning real property. Not a lot of them, but all counties have the, this is driving me crazy. All counties have the ability to provide water and sewer service. There's a few hybrids, is what I'm going to call them for the moment, where the legislature has actually, by a private act or through an act that allows utility authorities to be created. Generally, think of a utility authority as sometimes it has had an original association with the city, sometimes it does not. But it's created as a completely separate entity, not a part of the county. Jackson Energy Authority is a utility authority that at one time their utility systems were actually owned by the city of Jackson. Legislature came in, created a private act that created the Jackson Energy Authority. It is a completely separate entity from the city of Jackson. They also provide water and sewer. I put cooperatives up here simply because, in Tennessee, in rural areas, the type of entity that provides utility service is an electric cooperative. Electric co-ops are public utilities. They are not governmental entities, okay? They are really not-for-profit corporations that have a little bit of extra power given to them by the legislature. So there are several electric co-ops. There's also 3 or 4 telephone co-ops. They are exempt from federal income tax under a 501c11 exemption, but for all other purposes, they're treated like private entities. So they pay property taxes. So sometimes they will, it's difficult to compare yourself to a utility cooperative because they're not a governmental entity. And so sometimes you're a bit at a disadvantage. Groups will come to the electric co-op and they will give them this money for a charitable or civic purpose. Then they come to the utility district and say, we want money for the same thing. And unfortunately, the utility district has to turn to them and say, if they talk to me, you can't do that because you're a local government And the legislature has not given utility districts the power to make charitable or civic contributions to charitable and civic organizations. And then finally, we do have a few privately owned utilities in the state. There's one large water utility in the state that's privately owned, meaning it's not a governmental entity, it's not a nonprofit corporation. The Tennessee American Water Company provides water service in a pretty big segment of the city of Chattanooga. As a private entity, it's pretty heavily regulated by a state agency known as the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission that basically sets the rates for this entity, has to approve bond issues for this entity. They can't operate in a new territory unless the commission allows them to do so. There are a few small private water and sewer utilities as well. Generally, they are in areas where either the utility district or the city was not able to provide the service. And a lot of times they were originally created by a developer who needed water or sewer service. Nobody was available, and they basically created a small utility company to provide the service. So lots of entities, different types of entities that provide service. Depending on where you live, it could be very different than somewhere else. If you live in the city of Knoxville, there's the Knoxville Utilities Board. They provide all 4 of the traditional public utility services. If you live in Metro Nashville, the electric service in Nashville is provided by the Nashville Electric Service, which is a governmental entity, but it's created under a private act of the legislature. Their natural gas service in Davidson County and surrounding is by a private company known as Piedmont Gas. They're not a governmental entity. In Metro Nashville, the water and sewer service is provided by Metro Water and Sewer Services. It's actually operated as a department of metropolitan government. So if you live in Nashville, you get 3 different utility bills. You get one from NES, you get one from Piedmont Gas, and you get one from Metro Water and Sewer Services. Okay. A couple questions that through the years have been asked, and courts have answered them, that are important when you're thinking about utility districts. Does a utility district need a franchise from a city to serve within its boundaries? I just talked about Piedmont Gas in Nashville. If you're a city and you're not providing the utility service yourself, then you do have the ability to decide who's going to provide service within your municipal boundaries. You do that by giving a franchise, which is an agreement between the private utility and the city to operate. So Nashville, Piedmont Gas has a franchise from the city of Nashville. When that franchise runs out, it's generally going to be renewed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, okay? So the answer is, while cities generally can decide who's going to provide service within their boundaries, either because the city decides to do it or they give a franchise to somebody, it's not necessarily true with the utility district. As you can see, that case has some age on it, but it's a still good case where Middle Tennessee Utility District, and ex-managers down here smiling at me, basically, they had given a franchise to the city of Crossville, but they are geographic boundaries that we talked about at the beginning encompassed all of Cumberland County, including the city of Crossville. For some reason, and I don't know why, Crossville had given a franchise to Middle Tennessee Gas Utility District. That franchise expired because it has a term on it. And they were trying to reach an agreement about a new franchise, and they couldn't reach an agreement. So, the city of Crossville sues Middle Tennessee Utility District to basically say, you can't serve within our boundaries unless you get a franchise from us. Middle Tennessee Utility District took the opposite position and basically wound up being successful before the Tennessee Supreme Court. Tennessee Supreme Court said was, once the utility district is created and it has its boundaries, it has the exclusive right to provide service within those boundaries. You know, a city can't come in and require that you have a franchise. The only way to change the exclusive boundaries of the utility district is to go back to the county mayor that originally created the utility and request additional service. Very similarly, I mentioned the Tennessee American Water Company and it being regulated by an agency called the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission. If you are a private utility and you want to provide service somewhere in Tennessee, you just can't go and start digging and putting in your water lines and your sewer lines. You have to go to this agency and you have to show that there's a need for your service. And if they determine there's a need for your service, they give you a certificate of public convenience and necessities, and you're free to go and provide that service within the territory they give you. So, a very similar scenario out in the boundaries of the West Wilson Utility District, which sort of borders Davidson County. There was a developer who was not happy with the terms and conditions of service that West Wilson Utility District was going to require for the development. So the developer was going to make a run around the utility district and went to the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission. Back then it was called the Tennessee Public Service Commission. Atkins is the name of one of the commissioners, and got a certificate from the Tennessee Public Service Commission to operate within the boundaries of West Wilson Utility District. Obviously, West Wilson Utility District was not happy about that, and a lawsuit resulted. In the end, the Tennessee Supreme Court made a very similar decision as they had with the Middle Tennessee Gas Utility District. They basically came in and said, once the utility district is created and its boundaries are set, this agency, the Tennessee Public Service Commission, cannot come in and authorize another provider, because the legislature has said once the utility district is created, it has the exclusive right to provide service within their boundaries. So, not a lot of places in Tennessee where this exists, but there are more than you would think. I got to get moving. Okay, real quickly, some of the basic powers utility districts have. Utility districts have the power to serve both inside and outside their boundaries. Now, I've talked about the boundaries. They're important because they have the exclusive right to provide service within their boundaries, but the utility also has the ability to go outside their boundaries. Some utility districts have never served outside their boundaries. There's a significant number that serve outside their boundaries, some. There's some that serve a long way outside their original boundaries, but they're authorized to do that. They can issue tax-exempt bonds just like cities, counties can, have the ability to use state right-of-way and county municipal right-of-way for their, for their water lines, in compliance with TDOT and in compliance with whatever the city or county may require. As governmental entities, utility districts are exempt from all state, county, and municipal taxes. Why? Because the legislature said so. Okay, they have the ability to condemn real property for utility purposes. Especially more rural utilities never had to condemn anything in their entire existence. But those utilities that are one time were rural, that are now suburban in nature and sometimes even urban in nature, you have now had to experience, you've had to at times file a condemnation, whether to get an easement, a tank site, a pumping station site, so you have the ability to do that. utility districts have the exclusive right to provide service within their boundaries with a couple of exceptions. First, under Tennessee law, keep that phrase in mind, under Tennessee law, once a city annexes territory within a utility district, the city does have the prior right to say, I want to be the service provider within the territory that we've annexed. Keep that thought. There's also a mechanism where the statute says that, the county mayor that originally created the utility does have the ability to make a decision that there needs to be another provider within the boundaries of the utility district. This happens very rarely. Typically, it happens when there's a development that's right on the border of the city and the utility district that wants to get the better rates or better fees charged by the city. But ultimately, it's the county mayor that makes that determination upon the request of an interested party. And the county mayor is really only supposed to do that if there can be a showing that the utility district is either unable or unwilling to provide the service within their boundaries. So, under Tennessee law, a city does have the prior right to provide service in an area in which it annexes. However, there's a federal statute, and I've got the site up there because some of you all may have heard of 727 USC 1926B, generally 1926B. I am going to ask you this: how many people have heard of that statute? Several. Okay. That statute's very important for utility districts. And in real short order, here's why. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of utility districts were created in the 60s and 70s and 80s. When the Congress began funding through USDA, what's now rural development, of the expansion of water and eventually sewer service in rural areas, and that annual appropriation is in 7 USC 1926A. However, when they passed that statute, they included a subsection B that basically says that as long as a rural water, we're going to use the term utility district, but a rural utility has a loan outstanding with USDA, then a city cannot, by annexation or any other means, encroach upon the service area of the rural water utility. For our purposes, we're going to use the term utility district. Okay? That protection exists when, one, you have an outstanding loan from USDA, and two, you have made, quote, water service available or sewer service available in the area that's in dispute. Okay? So obviously, if you're serving customers, city annexes, if you have one of these loans, then the city is preempted by federal law from being able to take over your customers.
What about pass-through?
Okay.
What about a city pass-through your area?
Right. So this gentleman has asked, what about a pass-through? Meaning, what if a city wants to build a line that goes through your area in order to, serve another part of their area? The protection that's provided by this statute is a protection of customers and the infrastructure necessary to serve them. So as long as the neighboring city is not trying to serve within an area that you're serving, there's no problem with them because they're not taking revenue away. They're not taking customers away. So this statute's been litigated a lot across the United States. But for the most part, the courts have basically said the statute means what it says, and that is if you've made service available and you have a loan outstanding, then the city can't, by annexation or really any other means, take over your service area. If you're serving the customers, you've clearly made service available. If you have lines that are in the ground adjacent to a area that's in dispute, you've also made service available as long as you can provide service with those lines in a reasonable period of time. USDA loans are 38-year loans, okay? So once you get one, they're in existence for a long time. So especially those of you that are adjacent to cities, it's really the operation of 1926B allows you to continue to maintain your service area even though the city may have annexed into your area and may have annexed a substantial territory within your area. All right, I'm going to have to skip over several, so you just bear with me. All right, this one, by statute, the powers of the utility district are vested in and are exercised by majority of the Board of Commissioners of the district. Bottom line is, it's your responsibility if you are the board on the Board of Commissioners because the legislature has vested all of that authority in you. All right, you're gonna watch me go through a bunch. Okay, persons eligible to serve. Hopefully you all know this. In order to serve on the utility district board, you got to be at least 18 years of age. You've got to be a resident citizen of Tennessee, and you either have to reside within the district's boundaries or be a customer of the district. Okay, meaning that you can serve as a commissioner even though you're not within the geographic boundaries of the utility as long as you're a customer. And the statute defines what customer is. I mean, customer means a person who's regularly billed and pays for utility service rendered by the district. Okay, skipping. All right. Okay, how utility district board acts. Those of you that are on the Board of Commissioners of Utility District know most of what you do, you just do it by a voice vote at a board meeting. Why can you do that? Because that's what the legislature has said. The legislature said that the board of a utility district can exercise all its powers either by vote, ordinance, or by resolution. Utility district has never adopted an ordinance. They wouldn't even know what one was if it came up and bid them. So most is done by vote. Really, the only time the utility district has to act by resolution is if there's a statutory mandate that you act by resolution, or it's being required by a third party. If you issue a bond to USDA Rural Development, they're going to demand that you adopt a resolution to that effect. Same thing if you do a bond issue. You're going to have to adopt a 40-page bond issue that's this thick for that to be done. All right. Gosh. All right, I'm going to go to the end because I'm running out of time. So, all right. So, you know, when you're appointed to the board of a utility district and it is new to you, I understand you don't really have any idea what you're getting yourself into for a couple of reasons. One, it's a public utility. You operate as a monopoly. You don't have any experience in any other business operating as a monopoly, okay? The second reason is you're a governmental entity. If you're a Joe Blow business person, things that you could do in your own business, there's parameters and things that you can't do if you're a governmental entity. So, very normal to be appointed on the board, to go in there, and if it was me for about 3 months, I'd sit in there and I wouldn't say anything. I'm sitting there listening to what's being said because I don't want to show my ignorance because the county mayor has appointed me as a commissioner, okay? Very understandable. That's what I would do. However, at some point, you know, you now have been there a while and, you know, you're one of the 3 or you're one of the 5, or heaven forbid, in some places, you're one of the 7 board members that are vested with the responsibility to operate the utility. So, you know, sometimes it's important for a board member to say, why do we do blank? Whatever that may be, you know. That's a question you as a board member, once you're comfortable, you need to be asking if you don't understand why we're doing something a certain way, especially if there's something in you that says, this doesn't make sense or it doesn't seem right, okay? So why do we, whatever it may be? If the answer is, that's the way we've always done it, that is a bad answer, in my opinion, okay? Because, again, you're a governmental entity. Just because it's the way that's always been done, if it's not the way the legislature says you can do it, or if it doesn't comply with some other state or federal law, you as a commissioner need to know that. You're not going to know that if the answer by the manager and the other two commissioners are, that's the way we've always done it. In my opinion, that is a bad answer, okay? So, second response, I don't know. Why do we do what we're doing? Well, you know what? I don't know is a better answer, because at least it prompts somebody to make an inquiry. Are we doing it right? Are we not doing it right? Can we call somebody at TAUD and find out whether we're doing it right? Can we contact the comptroller's office and find out? At least if somebody says, I don't know, it prompts inquiry, okay? So, again, why do we, for those of you who've been here a while, John Hall said to do it that way. Lots of giggles. Those that are newer, John Greer said do it that way. That's better most of the time, okay? Then finally, Don Sco said do it that way. That's your best answer. Okay, so that's my very quick, I didn't get to everything, but that's my quick primer on utility districts. If it generates some questions, feel free to come up afterwards, and one day I'll get to where I can pare it down where I can talk about it in 50 minutes, but I didn't do it today. Thank y'all. And we'll take about a 10-minute break, so come on back in about 2. Yeah. Oh, before you leave and walk out the door, you need to get your badge scanned so that you can get credit for